Good evening, everyone. Hi, I'm Chris Nemechek. I'm the director for the Center for the Liberal Arts. And as you know, we're gathered tonight for our second on-campus Call 300 visit for the fall semester. Our Call 300 experiences join us with people, places, and ideas that lift us out of our familiar surroundings and deepen the way we see the world and ourselves in it. Our on-campus Call 300 courses this semester engage the theme Bodies That Matter. Our courses examine a variety of topics, including how bodies are conceptualized differently in distinct contexts across the globe, how bodies transform their surroundings and environments, and how scholars can stimulate recognition of overlooked, undervalued, or alienated bodies. We're delighted to have with us as our second visitor this semester, Bernedette Muthien, who joins us from Cape Town, South Africa. She is an activist, poet, educator, and government minister. Momentarily, I'm going to turn things over to Sylvia Tandasieras, professor of Hispanic Studies and chair of Modern Languages and Literatures, and a former fellow with the Center for the Liberal Arts. But before I do, I want to thank all of the Center for the Liberal Arts fellows, Ben Boone, our associate director, and Sharon Morris, our administrative assistant, for working so hard to make tonight possible. I also want to thank our co-sponsors, Dean Conley and the Arts and Sciences Dean's Office, the 100 Years of Women Celebration Committee, the Reeve Center for International Studies, and all of the Call 300 instructors for their commitment to the Call curriculum and our Call 300 courses. Sylvia?
Hi, everybody. Let's see, is this working? Yeah. I'm just so excited about today. So on behalf of the 100 Years of Women at William & Mary Academic Task Force, it's really an honor to introduce today's guest, Bernedette Muthien. I first met Bernedette 5 years ago when I directed the college's study abroad program in Cape Town. Students were pursuing research projects related to memory and human rights in post-apartheid South Africa, and Bernedette proved an invaluable partner in helping us navigate that complex landscape. Bringing her to campus has been a dream of mine since then, and I can think of no better occasion than this when we gather together today to think about bodies that matter. An internationally recognized activist, poet, facilitator, and scholar, Bernedette earned postgraduate degrees in political science from the University of Cape Town and Stellenbosch, and holds the distinction of being the first Fulbright Amy Beale Fellow at Stanford University in the mid-1990s. Hailed as one of South Africa's most gifted poets, her work has appeared across Africa, in the Americas, in Europe, and the UK, and has been translated into Spanish and Portuguese. She has held senior executive management positions in academia, civil society, and the public sector, both in and outside South Africa. And she serves on a number of international advisory boards, including the International Institute on Peace Education. As executive director of the South African NGO Engender, which she co-founded and directs, she works in the intersectional areas of genders and sexualities, human rights, justice, and peace. Until August 2016, she was the presidency's Deputy Director General for Social Transformation and Economic Empowerment. And she currently serves on the Commission for the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Communities, a commission established by the post-apartheid South African Constitution of 1996. What brings these degrees, titles, and recognitions together is Bernadette's steadfast and clear-sighted activism. The fight for equality and women's empowerment has been her life's work. It continues to be the horizon toward which she marches, using all the tools at her disposal to dismantle the master's house and welcoming others to join her in this journey. Her poetry plays an important role in this endeavor, bearing witness, beckoning us to lean in, and inspiring connection. Before inviting her to share more of her inspiring life story with you, I'd like to close by sharing one of her poems that, although written long ago, and on a different continent seems very much addressed to our today. The poem is called Fragile. In your eyes that shift with the anxieties of these times, I see the deepest compassion imaginable for the perpetrators in all we are, the survivor victims we're forced to be. In your wide open gaze, I see reflected my very own soul. And for your single act of kindness, I offer you my fragile heart. Please join me in welcoming Bernedette.
That was awesome. Thank you. I'm totally gobsmacked by the introduction. Thank you very much, both of you. Let me start by thanking three particular people and all my new friends for generously bringing me here and looking after me so well, especially Professor Sylvia Tandesiars, Ben Boone, and Sharon Morris, and all my other new friends. I would also like to thank what Iroquois Haudenosaunee scholar at Toledo University, Professor Barbara Ellis Mann, calls spirits of place, the ancient indigenous peoples who lived here hundreds of thousands of years ago. Let me know if I'm speaking too fast. I should thank the slaves and indentured laborers from Africa, Asia, Europe, and elsewhere, on whose backs and from whose broken pelvises the politics and economics of this vast, beautiful continent was built. Brutally wrought profits still driving this country and the world today. We're all drenched in the blood of these diverse peoples, blood that remains in the soil, suffering that stays on in our cells as in cellular memory, that replicate in our very DNA. Like South Africa, the US was sculpted through the most extraordinary colonial violences, of which slavery and genocide were critical parts of land and other resource dispossession, and mental and physical annihilation of entire peoples. Racist, classist, or casteist, gender and homophobic violences that persist in both our societies and regrettably will persist for some time yet to come. Violences that reside in the mindsets of the colonizers as much as the colonized, and whose mindsets we need to undo and indeed redo. This is a complex discussion raising complex issues with no easy answers and necessitating immensely hard work. To maintain violence is very, very hard work, and so is equally hard work is for us to transform this brutality into justice and ultimately peace or non-violence. The three types of violence and their respective antitheses, peace, identified by Johan Galtung in 1996, in his groundbreaking book, Peace by Peaceful Means, remain as useful as the intersectionalities of Kimberly Crenshaw and her clever friends a decade before that. So nonviolence or peace and feminism find happy homes in my ever critical mind. #woke. Galtung depicts a dynamic Galtung depicts a dynamic triangulation of violence and hence peace with no corner of the triangle on top. The triangle is constantly moving, nothing is on top. Galtung's direct violence, in which one person hits another, for example, can easily be dealt with through laws and in prisons to give us the absence of overt physical violence and hence apparent or negative peace. But if we don't address structural or institutional violence, such as inaccessible buildings for differently abled bodies and equal pay for equal work, our societies remain violent, necessitating institutional transformation. So we can have institutional peace and edge ever closer to our ideal of positive peace, a society free of all forms of violence. Which brings us to the third part of the triangle, cultural violence. Violence that lives and breeds in our consciousness or our mindsets, like victim blaming. I was imprisoned for lengthy periods during my adolescence under apartheid in the 80s, but it's my fault because I wanted to be part of the anti-apartheid movement, activism. I wanted to be a child soldier. I asked for the brutality and violence of the apartheid state and my PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder forever after. At university, I probably led on the male student who raped me because I was known to be flirtatious, and to quote him, and I'm quoting him, "We're all schooled in postmodernisms, know doesn't really mean no. My family were literally dirt poor because my parents were lazy. They didn't lift us up by our bootstraps, etc., etc., etc. All our own fault, all my own fault. Generations of genocide, we asked for it. Persistent femicide, we wanted. These last bitter forms of cultural violence stand between us and justice and positive peace. In other words, the absence of all forms of violence and realization of justice for all. I mean, absolutely all. Which means, good people, that no country anywhere is at true or positive peace because of persistent cultural violence, from hashtag I can't breathe and hashtag Black Lives Matter to hashtag Me Too, and indeed South Africa's hashtag We Too, because we don't like individualism, we want to be a collective, so hashtag We Too instead of hashtag Me Too. And more lately, in South Africa's young black women's protests against gender-based violence and femicide, which is called hashtag Total Shutdown, which was launched this August, demanding a national summit on combating gender-based violence, which the president has asked our government to convene within the next few weeks on my return from home. And so we have this hashtag, your generation of hashtags, which brings us usefully to different forms of democracy, some more participatory and honest than others, like my mother's people, the San. There is a depiction of some people, the San, whom some people call Bushman because they seem to live in the bush, in the Kalahari. The Kalahari is a desert, semi-arid region that straddles a vast desert that straddles 6 Southern African countries. And these San people are both social and gender egalitarian people who elect their leaders during set terms. No hereditary leadership, no patriarchy, no stark inequality. Real indigenous peoples the world over who still live like this. This is not entirely unlike some Scandinavian countries that are always at risk of backlash by neo-Nazis and neo-fascists, deeply insecure people like rapists who want to spoil our egalitarian fun. South Africa during the 90s had the racist apartheid government enter into negotiations led by Nelson Mandela, who said, bring me all the finest minds in the country and make sure at least one in every group is a woman. Nelson Mandela was a beautiful man to me, whom I realized only 20 years later did not sell our country cheap, but is navigating precarious conditions that could have been variously disastrous for us. President Mandela then led us to develop a beautiful constitution comprised of different chapters, prefaced by a Bill of Rights in Chapter 2, which enshrines equality literally for all, within a context of limited state resources and hence progressive realization of rights, such as that free dialysis may not be universally accessible due to limited fiscus, but every woman over 40 can have 3 free pap smears in a lifetime, useful for detecting human papillomavirus or HPV, which can cause cervical cancer and death if undetected. Some people are advertising HPV vaccines nowadays. I am undecided, but I just thought I'd put that in. I'll ad-lib that one. Our equality clause says the state or person may not discriminate, and I'm quoting them now, directly or indirectly against anyone on one or more grounds, including race, gender, sex, pregnancy, marital status, ethnic or social origin, color, sexual orientation, age, disability, religion, conscience, belief, culture, language, and birth. So comprehensive, it covers everything plus the kitchen sink. All that's missing is hair texture. Don't discriminate against straight hair or curly hair or whatever. Chapter 9 of our Constitution establishes the institutions which concretely ensure the realization of our rights, from the broader Human Rights Commission to the Commission for Gender Equality, and indeed the youngest, my Commission for the Promotion and Protection of Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Rights, mandated since 2004 to promote and protect the cultural, religious, and language rights of individuals, and as equally importantly, the rights of communities. So individual and community rights, and to foster peace and reconciliation in our wounded societies. In fact, our CRL Act, as we call it, speaks of promoting friendship and peace, which is why I'm particularly friendly, friendship and peace. This is what the CRL Act says, and I'm quoting him now, to promote and develop peace, friendship, humanity, tolerance, and national unity among and within cultural, religious, and linguistic communities on the basis of equality, non-discrimination, and free association. We really take our freedom seriously in South Africa. So for me, it's a very beautiful constitution. These are beautiful institutions to uphold the Constitution. We have beautiful ideals which gave birth to our new, equal, just, and less violent society and world. So our democracy is not entirely, the foundations of democracy is not entirely the formation of the League of Nations after World War I, the United Nations after World War II, and the International Criminal Court, or ICC, and its Rome Statute after the 1990s genocides in Yugoslavia and Rwanda, respectively. These institutions were all founded on the timeless values of ethics, justice, and compassion, foundational principles evident in every society on every continent, some needing deeper digging than others. Indeed, even here in Williamsburg, where some students will be seen to help and support one another through very challenging times. Did you see students helping each other or not? Did you know? Do you see students helping each other? All right, so I'm not smoking marijuana because we just decriminalized marijuana possession for personal use. So I just wanted to be sure, have I already begun, smoking marijuana, which I don't do. That's just been decriminalized, so it's not a crime anymore. So while South Africa struggles at times to catch rapists and femicidal men who murder their female partners every 4 to 6 hours throughout the country, we've stomped our boots and indeed our sandals, and we're now taking to jailing wounded people who verbalize racism on our streets. Ironically, 2 of the first are middle-class white women. So the first is this white middle-class woman, poor thing, Penny Sparrow, who called black people on the beach over the December holidays monkeys, because she said they littered the beach she usually frequents. She lives in Durban. It's on this side of the coast. It's warm there. It's the Indian Ocean. This side is the Atlantic Ocean. It's cold. And so she was upset about all these black people on her beach, which she normally has free reign to, and she called them monkeys, and they litter too much. So they took her to court. She was fined 150,000 rand, which is about 10,500 USD, which is an awful lot of money, even for a middle-class woman. Then another white middle-class woman, do you sense a pattern here? Vicky Momberg gets carjacked, poor thing. She got carjacked by a young black man, and when the black police officers came to aid, she called them racist names. She's clearly deeply traumatized at the time by the carjacking, and her vituperation was obviously extremely inappropriate. The officers, though, said they felt deeply wounded by her racist spewing. These grown men were so deeply wounded by a disturbed, vulnerable, brutalized, traumatized woman on a pavement. Vicky Momberg became the first person recently to go to jail for racism, sentenced to 3 years with one of it suspended, so effectively in custody for 2 years, and her crime is racism. Given the proliferation of racism in South Africa, not to mention the US and other parts of the world, we'll have to build a veritable empire of prisons like Andrea Smith's prison industrial complex, empire of prisons to jail all these racists. And how will that jailing of racists solve our systemic dilemmas, sticking people in prison rather than helping them overcome bad education in apartheid families, schools, communities, indeed in a racist, white supremacist world? Personally, I think racists, sexists, homophobes should be sent to diversity rehabilitation. They should be sent to rehab camps to return transformed and contribute to building our beautiful country. Punitive so-called justice rarely breeds Mandelas or Oscar Lopez Riveras in Puerto Rico, who after 30 years in US jails for supposed sedition, now magnanimously practices the politics of love, as he told me in person 2 weeks ago. We should all indeed, and I'm quoting, pump our racists, pump our sexists, pump your homophobes, man. Do you know this TV series called Pump Your Car or something? I'm trying to riff of that. So pump the racists, pump the sexists, pump the homophobes, so that we can build a more just, ethical, peaceful, indeed a world that is more habitable. So our societies in the world are not static. Societies indeed the world are like we are. We're dynamic, evolving, and we're able to transform like water from vapor to liquid to ice and back over time, one moment to the next. What we need from Williamsburg to Cape Town is constant vigilance, not passivity, but active citizenship, to ensure these ethics of ours of justice and compassion not only survive in constant onslaughts from neo-fascists, but it actually thrives as we continuously co-create our societies of egalitarianism, both social and gender egalitarianism. Societies free of discrimination, worlds in which every human being can realize their full human potentials in this lifetime. This hard work and vigilance is no dinner party. It's no dinner party banter either. In times where powerful economic and political forces own and control everything, including social media, we all rely on, we need increasing vigilance, increasing active activism, not passive social media all night long, but active activism, as in feet and wheels in streets and everywhere. We need every one of us without exception to help co-create the worlds we all dream about, interdependent universes of ethics, justice, and compassion. And I cannot reiterate those words enough. Ethics, justice, and compassion. Until we wake up at 3 a.m. and you just look up and you go, ethics, justice, and compassion. We need alternative realities, ethics, justice, and compassion. Led by selfless servant leaders we justly elect with term limits, as my mother's people, the San, have done for aeons. Isn't that ironic then? Modern democracies founded on ancient indigenous principles, like apparently the United States Constitution founded on the great peace of the Haudenosaunee, or also called Iroquois by the French colonizers. In 1993, Nelson Mandela said that all oppression and hence all liberation are connected, as are we all too, one in many and many in one. Like South Africa's Ubuntu, I am, bless you, like South Africa's Ubuntu, I am because I care, I am because I care, I am because I belong. My humanity is inextricably connected to your humanity. Our respective and collective well-being is profoundly intertwined or interwoven. In closing, may I offer you my very short poem, but Sylvia has already done it. So maybe they'll just project, oh, I didn't put it on the slide, sorry. Do you want me to do the poem? Yes. I should do the poem together. So may I offer you my short poem, Fragile, and great minds think alike. We were born in the same special year. I can't do it as well as her, though. In your eyes that shift with the anxieties of these times, I see the deepest compassion imaginable for the perpetrators in all we are, the survivor victims we forced to be. In your wide open gaze, I see reflected my very own soul. And for your single act of kindness, I offer you my fragile heart. I should have said my fragile and courageous heart, Sylvia, but that's for the next poem coming up soon. So with humility and hope, I thank you, beautiful global citizens. You truly are beautiful. March on for justice and creativity. Thank you.
You can't get away quite that easily,
That was a nice
Bernadette.
try,
It was a good try. Thank you very much for your thoughtful words and for your visit this week. It's been really wonderful to have you on campus, and I know that many of our students have had the opportunity to meet with you. I know you guys probably have questions, and there will be microphones circulating. They are at the ready, so feel free to raise your hands with those questions, and I think we have index cards coming over from the, yes, I'm getting a thumbs up on that, from the other room as well. So one of the things, actually the poem was so beautiful and got me thinking from the very beginning. I'm glad that it came at both the beginning and the end. That seemed really appropriate to me. So a happy happening, I guess. But what role do you see poetry playing in your life as an activist? And in terms of, for our students, thinking about the role of arts and poetry, literature, and so forth, in what ways can that have a bearing on thinking about and engaging the idea that of bodies that matter?
It's a very important question you raise, in particular in the ways in which different systems of thought and rule impact on us, like, for example, patriarchy, which cleaves many Abrahamic religions, cleave the thought, the head, or the intellect off from the heart, the genitals, and the rest of your body. Indeed, they make chopped mince, beef mince, like finely ground mince beef with your body parts instead of integrating it all. And most of all, the creativity that gets whacked out of you from a young age, so that you can be more analytical. I think, therefore I am, Descartes, instead of I am because I am human, I care, I'm fragile, etc. And so under these very, very hard conditions, being creative and enacting creativity is a revolutionary act, and one should continue to be as creative as the lovely fellows on your campus.
Thank you.
And Sylvia too.
Absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how you got started thinking about poetry, and how, I mean, was it something that was always in you, or was there sort of a joy of reading others' poetry and then trying your hand at it? I think a lot of students, this is not something that they would think about naturally as a career, and I think it's interesting to hear about how creative people end up doing what they're doing.
Sure. I come from a family of nerds, so we were very nerdy.
None of us do.
It means you walk, you know, when you're daydreaming, you walk into lampposts. I was very intimate with a great many lampposts in Cape Town as a child. And so we were also very creative. Some of us were more creative than others. And I have a brother who is homosexual or gay. He's 3 years older than I, and we played together a lot. He looked after me. I annoyed him a lot, etc. He calls me a duckling to this day. But we painted, we made music, and we could only get classes to a certain age. And thereafter, no money, go to hell, no creativity. No, there goes the piano lessons, there goes the art class. But poetry is free. You need something to write on and something to write with. You can write in the air if you like, in which case you're not collecting the poem, but you're sending it out into the ether. So yeah, poetry just came naturally, doesn't cost any money, and is easy enough to do even in prison.
Excellent. Are there questions that you all want to? I have many more. I can keep going. But Michael's going to get his exercise today.
Thank you. You talked a lot about South Africans' love for freedom, and you talked about the Constitution guaranteeing different things. Article 9, I think you specifically referenced. And then you talked about instances of people being jailed for speech and a lack of freedom of speech. I think it's strange to kind of talk about all these freedoms and then give instances of this lack of a very basic freedom that we have here in America. For that, to kind of reconcile that and relate it back to the topic of bodies that matter, where do you think human rights come from? What is the basis of human rights in your understanding?
Okay, shall I respond first? It's very critical questions you raised. The one thing that is, shouldn't surprise me, but is a little bit disappointing, is the ways in which you equate racism and hate speech. It's an actual codified, illegalized form of hate speech as free speech. There's a fundamental difference between the two, between hate speech and causing harm, deliberately or inadvertently, as the traumatized woman did, inadvertently probably, and free speech. So when I stand on a podium and I speak for peace or justice, or you come stand next to me and you speak for whatever values you hold dear, that is free speech, because hopefully we're not harming each other. If you're standing on the same podium and calling me names, pejorative names, deeply troubling names, names rooted in extraordinary genocide and slavery and depredations committed against people that persist to this day, then that is no longer free speech, that is hate speech. For that, you know, that is troublesome. I don't want to send people to prison. I do not believe in punitive justice and imprisoning people. I believe that even you, we can work with and rehab with enough time and energy. So that's the one part of it. The basis of human rights has deep roots. It comes from the philosophy of John Locke, sitting up all the way there in England, writing about how human rights can be used as a vehicle for the expropriation of native lands, indigenous lands, on this beloved continent of ours. It also speaks of the rights of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the rights of man. And in case nobody noticed, I'm not a man, neither born nor wishing to express as a man. And so too, that discourse of Rousseau, sitting in France, writing for us about human rights and the foundations of human rights, excluded my bodiliness. And I assert my body too matters. And so we have to be as vigilant in understanding where much of what we have comes from, in the same ways that we must be vigilant in understanding where the US Constitution comes from in relation to its association with the great peace of the Haudenosaunee, which precedes it by quite a while. In the same way as South Africa's democracy and democratic practices can come from a great many indigenous people, like my mother's son in the Kalahari, who elect their leaders with term limits and where the society is egalitarian. We keep trying, every day is a new day.
I wanted to first of all, thank you for doing this. All of us, William and Mary, thank you. And I wanted to ask, and I kind of already had this just answered by the previous answer, but the $10,500 fine that the person received for their comment that they made about the beach. You mentioned, I just wanted to ask, because they went by very quickly, what you meant by bringing that up, that it was an inappropriate thing to have fined that person such a hefty fee, what your own personal opinions are on that fine and what that was brought up for. Thank you.
It's more reflection. I don't know whether it's appropriate for reflecting on it internationally, but I think you have a lot of questions similar to us and similar to me. It's more reflection of what means justice and what is just practice. So we have still persistent racism in our country, and we're trying to grapple with it. And so in fining, the first woman was Penny Sparrow, I think, and the second person who said blacks or monkeys on the beach, and the other one is Vicky Momberg, and she's the one that was so traumatized and used the K word and is now in prison, serving a sentence that would mean she spends 2 years effectively in prison. So it disturbs me when we use that, when we do that, we're punitive, we punish people. It's like think about the Abrahamic religions and how punishment is so intrinsic in that culture. So, even the notion of karma at times is misused to imply that, I stomped my foot because I, just ate her candy while she wasn't watching. So that's my punishment, crime and punishment. But so I truly, and many others too, believe that, that we need to do restorative justice. We need to make right where we have wronged. But in order for us to make right where we have wronged, we need to understand that what we did is wrong. So in jailing a deeply traumatized person who had just been carjacked with a firearm, she's traumatized. If all she knew in that moment was to spout racist hatred, and I question, how two police officers, strong men, both wearing firearms and other forms of weaponry, could be so traumatized by a traumatized middle-class white woman who didn't know what she was doing really effectively, and then feel so much better about themselves that they want to put her in jail. And so ways in which we go, punish her. We could hate, like more and more violence, more and more hatred, instead of trying to find ways to solve the challenges of our society in more constructive ways. Do you agree with that or not? But it's interesting that both questions started with the first fining and jailing of the two poor middle-class white women who should really know better.
And
so be careful when you come to South Africa.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit, Bernedette? Just in terms of, well, I think in the United States in particular, obviously, most attempts at regulating hate speech fail, and they fail due to our constitutional precedent that all speech, the sort of solution to speech we may deem harmful or negative, is more speech, right? This idea that by having a marketplace of free ideas, including those with which most of us may disagree and even find abhorrent, that is the sort of solution to those negative views, and sort of how you see both the questions that you hear in this kind of a context. I mean, I think because we are bodies that have been socialized in this unique context in the United States, we have different assumptions about that than I think others would in other places.
These are deep philosophical questions that we're raising, and it shows itself in the ways in which different societies choose to organize themselves. One part is critical. We do need legislation. I can't answer for the extreme ways in which people define free speech in this country. Sure. It's very troublesome. To call me dirty names and abuse me, perhaps then I could effect a civil claim against the person, should I want to go the legal route. If indeed some people feel that's the only route. But in South Africa, reconciliation has been a deep part of our society since the 1990s. It's led by Nelson Mandela. Right. We had a former Minister of Police, his name is Adriaan Vlok, who did horrendous things. You can imagine, he was an apartheid Minister of Police. I was part of the last generation of apartheid youth. So he was particularly loathed by, us when we were young. And so, in high school. And so this man then, he had a cathartic Christian moment. He was kind of born again or whatever. I don't know what language he used. But so his catharsis had him realize the horrors of his sins. And there was a priest who became a political leader in the new government, very close to President Mandela, whose feet he went to wash because this person he had tortured and caused suffering on. And this symbolic act, Christian act of washing the feet and seeking forgiveness for past depredations was a very profound moment for many in our society. Being younger then, I was very feisty. I was not the same grown-up woman I am now. I was like looking at him like thinking, yeah, that's going to make like thousands of deaths that you cause any better. But now, in hindsight, when we're trying to build society, not break it down some more, I feel that it was quite a magnanimous gesture. It showed that it had an epiphany and he knew that what he'd done was wrong. What would you like us to do? Nuremberg trials? We can arrange that too.
Michael, I think Michael has some cards from the other room.
From the other room, I'll just read it. America is currently divided on what rights mean. Is there such a divide in South Africa, and what are the popular definitions?
Shall I answer one by one? It's good, it's useful, then I won't get sidetracked, which is often a problem. So, as you saw, the Constitution enshrines a whole range of rights. At the United Nations level and in international law, there are different generations of rights. The first one would be your immediate needs, and so it will go on and on and on, until eventually in 1993 at the Vienna United Nations Conference for Women, they defined even women's rights, hallelujah, as human rights. So South Africa just skipped all those decades of dilly-dallying and nonsense and went straight and included all possible rights. As you saw, the Equality Clause, I forgot, it even included pregnancy. You may not be discriminated against based on pregnancy. All that it didn't include was like hair texture, so or height, etc. So our view of rights is like extremely comprehensive. We include everything. We try not to hierarchize one over the other because they're all intertwined, inextricably connected. And indeed, some rights like women, gender equality, that is non-negotiable. You cannot discuss it even. It is absolutely bottom line in the Constitution.
Okay.
Poverty, yes, I mean, Section 25 of the Constitution. So the Constitution protects the right to own private property. But we have to ask, in the two countries that you and I come from, respectively, or many of you come from, then we have to ask how the property got gotten. Using John Locke and others, how the property was taken or purchased or just begot. So this is a vexing challenge for us, as it is for you all here. And the other part of the challenge is much more seriously, it's as seriously as the stolen lands. The other part of the problem is, in a deeply unequal society, you cannot eradicate 300 years of colonialism and slavery, brutal genocide, and about 50 years of apartheid. You cannot eradicate it just like that. We've only had 24 years of democracy, and 10 of that was was very challenging the last 10 years. We have a new administration and a wonderful new president. So the challenge is, if in an unequal society, think of the pyramids or something, an unequal society is inherently unstable. And in order for you to have, I mean, apart from the ethical imperatives to share wealth, to share resources, That's the one critical part of it. The other part of it is the lack of stability of an unequal society. And for the ones who have, that they will never securely have. Their property will never be secure because there'll always be the masses clamoring for what they have. And so in order for you to have a more secure and less violent society, a society of equality and justice, we need to share. It's as simple as that. And therein lies the rub. Land ownership is one part of it, which is very largely white-owned. The inequality of our society, the economy is controlled and owned by largely white men. 82% was the last statistic I heard. So if you have a society in which the majority of people are black, but 82% of the wealth is owned by white men, and that includes property, that includes the economy like the stock exchange, etc. This is troublesome, don't you think? So we have to transform that. How we do that, we will continue to debate and discuss and try to do justly and compassionately. So again, when you visit, don't hate speech and think about where you buy your property.
Is it working? Okay. Hi. Thank you. I just wanted to say you respond and how you speak is just, you speak so poetically and it's very beautiful. But my question, I'm going to just directly address what is going on in the U.S. today. I want to know your perspective on what's been going on within our government, specifically the judicial area, in terms of the nomination and then the acceptance of and induction of the now U.S. Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, despite sexual allegations, and what implications this also has for gender-based violence and other issues globally and amongst our nation, and also for victims of assault as well, because I know it's been a very hard and challenging time for those who've been affected by such tragic circumstances.
I'm going to do two parts. I'm going to, one, answer from my perspective, and two, I'm going to ask Sharon to answer from the local perspective. So let me first say that I was deeply disappointed in the entire process. I didn't at times seem as if adults and mature, educated people, grounded people were responsible for the process. I was particularly disappointed in the ways in which it reminded us brutally of Anita Hill's case some years ago, and how things may even have worsened since then, if not improved. So that's the one part of it. The other part of it is that many of us come from feminist backgrounds. We are rape survivors like myself, etc. And it triggered a great many people, women and men and people. It triggered us in relation to our experiences of gender violence, which is quite mundane often. So this also was not very pleasant. On so many levels, it was deeply disappointing. Is that okay for me to say? And then I'll ask Sharon to speak.
Yeah, I think so.
Chris?
Yeah.
It's okay. Yeah, Michael, you have another. So I'll just very brief. You guys came to hear Bernedette, not me. So I'll just very, very briefly say that the process itself in which the allegations were made, I think we cannot disentangle one from the other. And the process of staffing the federal judiciary in general and the Supreme Court in particular has become incredibly fraught, and I would argue darn near broken in terms of the way both parties have structured the system, particularly in the last 20-ish years. So I do think that it is very difficult, like I say, to disentangle those things. I think it does highlight the damage that can be done when there is when the process itself is already so fraught. The idea and the fact that there is so much distrust that has now been built into the process it really cannot handle an additional disturbance. And I think we saw that happening in real time. I'm not minimizing the allegations or the question. I study this stuff from an institutionalist perspective. I'm a political scientist. So my background is more on that side of things, but I think that it does illustrate that if our institutions are not healthy, it is a very difficult prospect to actually deal well with these kinds of issues.
Can I add?
Please.
I want to just affirm you and say that I'm in solidarity with you, I hear you, and that of course we believe both Professor Ford as we believe Anita Hill, as we should believe me. So, and you indeed. So the key thing is that you need more vigilance and activism in this country. You need more feet and wheels on the streets. So we want to affirm you in the fact that you need to go do some more of that to ensure that you keep your government and your institutions accountable. That's the meaning of a democracy, to participate, isn't it? Take back your institutions.
Oh, hi. So my question actually kind of ties into that. The whole idea of active activism and then sexual assault in South Africa.
Can you wave, because I can't see?
Hi.
I see you now, thanks. Go ahead.
So I mean, gender violence in South Africa is almost normalized and so ingrained, and I guess in many cases it's not actually safe for women to speak up against it because it's more dangerous that way. So how can you, how do you recommend the country and affected women can speak up and do that active activism while still remaining safe, if that makes sense?
Well, safety is all in the mind. Some years ago, not so long ago, the Institute for Security Studies, a renowned security studies think tank, independent one, did a study of perceptions of safety. And it did a study, and it went to communities that are upper middle class and like security compounds where you have to sign a register, and the village is like walled off, like, what do you call those things? Walled communities?
Yeah.
Like they are all over the world. So there the people were terrified of, of burglary, murder, rape, marauding, while they were ironically the most secure, given the fact that they're walled and nobody can come in except for the cleaners and other workers. And simultaneously then they looked at very poor communities in townships and asked them about their senses or perceptions of security. And those people ironically felt more safe, going about their business than the people in the walled off part. So that's the one thing is we must be critical of and check our perceptions of safety and vulnerability. The other part is South Africa is very good at doing statistics, extremely good. Our statistics, South Africa ranks like up there with the finest in the world. And we gather statistics very well. Even our police services gather statistics on crime and the trends over the years in relation to crimes going up, going down, etc. So based on that, we get into the Guinness Book of Records in '99 for having the highest rape statistic in the world. It doesn't mean that women and girls and boys and all kinds of people aren't getting raped in India or Brazil or indeed here in the United States. It just means that we have more effective ways of gathering statistics and being more transparent about those statistics. It could also be a hangover from the horrors of centuries of violence and brutalization, but I think that it is more true than not that 1/3 of female bodies, and we're not even mentioning other bodies other than the polarized male and female bodies, that female bodies, 1/3 of all, which Eve Ensler a few years ago extrapolated into 1 billion women, are survivors of various forms of gender-based violence. All over the world.
You stated earlier that you believe that...
Can you wave so I can see where you are?
Yo.
Gotcha.
You stated earlier that you believe that racists, homophobe, misogynists, bigots, what have you, should be rehabilitated. Hate and prejudice, though, is often deeply ingrained in someone's psyche, in someone's identity. develops over years and might take decades even to completely root out. So with that in mind, what does racist rehab look like? What's the process like, and where would this take place? Would it take place in existing prisons or new institutions?
Who are you saying that evil word, prisons? Okay. Are you done?
Yeah, I'm good.
So for some years now, I've been training people. I'm, for example, training the legislature in the province or state around which Johannesburg, or the economic hub of my country, the region, and a large part of the continent revolves. I train the legislature, the staff, the management, and the legislators themselves in diversities. They call it transversal mainstreaming because it's cross-cutting issues: gender, race, disability, youth, etc. So it's a very simple way, depending on how much time people have, 1 hour or 5 days for me. I can, and many others do similar work in my country and indeed in your country and across the world. So it doesn't require prison. It just requires one's passion, the trainer's passion, and the people's commitment to stay and learn, even though it's uncomfortable. And I see people shift every day in my work and in my life, whether it be formal training like that or in other ways. And no prisons are needed for that. We might need prisons for other things, I don't know.
Could you talk a little, so one of the, in the US, I think the closest thing we get to this is something of sort of a movement for restorative justice, particularly for nonviolent crimes. It tends to be much more sort of popular in the United States. But just the role of these types of programs or reconciliation programs and so forth, and what that sort of brings to both, as we might think of them, offenders and victims, that a general penal state does not?
Restorative justice comes from indigenous societies again. So lovely. We get so much from indigenous societies, not just the land, but entire systems of law and politics and governance. So restorative justice practiced both here in your country and in my own by indigenous people, in which, as I mentioned before, I've done a harm. I must recognize that what I've done is wrong. Hitting you is not okay. If I think hitting you is okay, that's a problem. Then I need a whole program around, one can't go around hitting people. If I took your thing as well. And then I must make a restoration. And the restoration will come from you as in how much are you aggrieved that I took your candy and ate it, or come from me in relation to I must understand that your candy was or chocolate was very precious to you and I shouldn't have taken it. And then we discuss this, hopefully in a convivial way, and find a way in which I can make reparation for eating your chocolate. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. The land issue and redistribution of land, this is a vexing challenge. It's rooted in such brutality and persistent inequality and violence that it elicits a lot of emotion from people. Mm-hmm. So that will be a little bit more heady than, negotiating the chocolate. Sophia, can I have my shawl, please?
Hi. Over here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, love. Yeah?
So thank you for
Right
speaking.
near Michael.
And I just want to ask if you could comment on the Nobel Peace Prize being awarded to 2 people who have fought against sexual violence, and whether you think that will have any impact either here or in South Africa.
It's already had a huge impact in South Africa and around the world, of course. 2 parts to it. The horrific rape survivor, I think she was a Yazidi young person, and the Congolese doctor who does this work every day in such a courageous way. So we take courage from both of their stories, both of the examples. Forgive me, I just want to arrange your country is cold sometimes. I just carry my little blankie with me everywhere, my security blankie. I find the stories very moving, and we draw great inspiration from their examples that they've turned horrible things. I mean, sexual slavery under the most brutal conditions into something from which we can derive inspiration and take courage from. This indeed is profound. As well, I'm keen to hear your views. So if you could tag your views onto your questions as comments, that would be also very interesting.
Go ahead, Kristen. Right,
First off, thank you for being here. But William & Mary has a very active, activist community, and also a very active, politically engaged community. But a lot of times the two groups don't really mix. So I was wondering, as coming from someone who is both an activist and involved in governance, what you thought the best way to translate activist sentiment was into political action.
I think if I gathered from last night's little soiree, there was lovely Tex-Mex food and there was a lot of lemonade, and the young people enjoyed the lemonade greatly. When adults are there, you may add some wine for them. So that would be a good inducement. I think it's just persistence. If you wear, it's like water over a rough rock. You wear it down. You just persist. Use all kinds of ploys to convince people. As a little girl, I went around the schoolyard and everywhere else, ostensibly selling this grassroots magazine, which was a political and community newsletter for fundraising purposes. But mostly you use that as a vehicle to talk to people. You continuously talk, and you speak from your deepest convictions while listening to the other person's point of view as well. And hopefully some kind of rapprochement and come along board will occur. Tirelessness, I suppose, a lot of coffee.
As an activist, how do you avoid compassion fatigue? Because I know it seems like every other week another black man is killed by police, another school is shot up, another sexist gets a position of power. How do you find the strength to keep fighting that as an activist?
You've just whacked me on my head now with that. The two words, compassion and fatigue. Now, there's a different way to look at it as compassion fatigue. Let's flip it around and mess with it a little, with respect, right? So instead of compassion fatigue, one should discuss vicarious trauma. So I'm walking down the street, there's a horrible car accident, or indeed on this campus, a golf cart accident. And mine is electric. So there's a car accident or golf cart accident, and I'm watching it because I'm not participating in it, and I feel vicarious trauma from witnessing something horrible. And this is different to getting tired of compassion, because if you are deeply human and deeply in touch with your own humanity, and you will then be able to see everybody else's humanity. If you are continuously in touch, in a brutal society, it'll continue to punch you and try to take your humanity and your compassion away, but must always resist that. So there's no such thing as compassion fatigue, because you can never be tired of being human and recognizing humanity in other people. But on the other hand, you could suffer from vicarious trauma, in which case you need a small holiday with lemonade and wine for me, lemonade for you.
Another. No? Well, I have a question, and we'll go to the person up in the audience. So you've been with us on campus for several days now. And in thinking about our theme for the semester, do you see places, opportunities for us to grow as a community with respect to bodies that matter? And in what ways might we as a community engage the theme?
That's
it's
cruel.
A huge, big question.
It's huge and it's cruel because I'm in the honeymoon phase.
Oh, well, that honeymoon phase never ends.
Where the faculty and the students are also engaging in so very different. I should mention another university where I was before I came here, and I find it very inspiring the way in which the students are #woke and they engage. And this fellows program where somebody's doing sculpture, another chemistry, we've got a political science. It's just wonderful and very deeply inspiring. How you can improve on that, I haven't yet been able to see, but because I've not been here long enough, I haven't seen people organizing. So I don't know in relation to could they, be more active, could they organize more, but I hear you have a lot of activists here. You have young people who went on those marches to Washington, D.C. and other places. That all I find deeply inspiring. So the idea that millennials or whatever other epithet people stick on you inadvertently, that you aren't passive, just consumers of social media and such like, but that you actually deeply care about your society and you do want to see it reflect your values, which are the same values as mine, those three: ethics, justice, compassion. Thank you.
Our mantra. All right, maybe one last question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So as you mentioned, there are like lots of economic inequality and some like violence of gender in South Africa. So do you think it is like a failure of the previous activism that related to reconciliation instead of like brutal revolution? Do you think like a more brutal sort of revolution can probably make the economy more equal and eliminate the sexual harassment, or are you think it will make things even worse?
I was at a meeting in Parliament recently where they were reviewing women's issues. And it's very funny because every year there's a women's parliament or a gender parliament. And so one young woman from the hashtag Total Shutdown decolonized the university movement. A young black woman said very strongly that she even advocates amputation as amputation, no? Chopping of the penis, what's it called?
Amputation. Yeah.
No, there's another word. When you chop off a penis, what's it called?
Oh, castration. Oh, I'm sorry. I missed the last part there. I'll be here all week.
Oh, is it?
That's right.
Okay, no, that
Sorry.
is cool. So castration, she advocates castration for rape because she feels that it is so endemic on universities as well. Blatantly, other male students will be raping women students and so on. So yes, we have a lot of inequality, but you can't in 24 years eradicate hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of brutality. I do believe, and I've seen it in practice, that violence begets violence. So in order for yourself to be violent, in wars, for example, it's very, very clear how they had to shoot at soldiers during World War I, for example, in order for them to go and kill, to go and shoot the opposition, because they all looked alike. It was Europe, It wasn't like they were shooting black people. That might have been different. It was because they were all, French shooting German boys and vice versa. So one can see now why people developed and enjoyed drone technology, because it makes it seem like you're playing a video game, but you're not. You're actually killing live human beings. And this is the challenge. So it's hard to combat inequality, and I don't believe violence is the solution for that, and it would just drag us down some more. The challenges of living in a global environment in which we are all interdependent. The economies of the world, countries tap into global economy for better or for worse, and one can't just step outside of that willy-nilly. So these are some of the challenges we have in terms of governance. I do think, though, that to finish fast is that we have some of the best legislation and policy. Do you remember my pretty constitution? Isn't it beautiful? So, extrapolating from that constitution, we have most profoundly beautiful legislation in the country. For example, our Domestic Violence Act. Don't speak of one man and one woman in a domestic situation to codify the violence and what to do about it. It speaks of a family setting, which includes non-DNA family members. It can include a neighbor, it can include a tenant. So it speaks of kinship. So we have radical and progressive legislation and policy, which we implement in profound ways. So I think we have dealt very, very well, given the short space of time, with the legacies of apartheid, which we'll still be dealing with for a long time to come. So it's just an ongoing challenge. But the same questions you must turn in on yourself and your communities that you come from, because I'm sure the College of William and Mary, as lovely as it is not immune. You would want to ask your dean of students, or whomever is most appropriate, how many rapes occur on campus? How many partners are caught for beating others, etc. You'd want to know that, and I ask, and I would love to know as well, is there anyone from the women's movement here in the room, from the campus women's movement, or one of many? No one? Little feminist? Young feminist? Sorry for calling you little. Yeah, so I want to know, how many rapes occur on campus? How many rapes occur in the town, etc., etc. I believe there's no homelessness because we're trying to donate excess food last night.
don't have an answer for you.
Oh, no.
A number, okay.
No, Chris, I don't want you to be goddess, but
Okay.
you've gotten close to it already.
Good enough. All right. Well, thank you very much for your visit. This has been wonderful to have you.
Thank you.